Did you know that in 2013, scientists proved that Bigfoot are the biblical Nephilim? And that is because the mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA that comes from the mother, is 100% human. That means that Sasquatch is 50% human. Not only that, but they determined that this interbreeding was an event that happened 15,000 years ago. Why is that important? Because the flood event that is talked about all over the world, we now know was now by scientists called the Younger Dryas cataclysm flood event, which happened 13,000 years ago. What is the biblical narrative? That sons of God or angels chose to take wives from humans. And as a result of that, the Nephilim were born. As soon as that happened, according to the biblical narrative, then God sent the flood. Other narratives, as you know, I'm not trying to promote the biblical narrative. The Bible is written based on a lot of older stories. But all over the world, the flood narrative talks about how human beings had become corrupted and evil, and the gods sent the flood to wipe out civilization and start over again. So the question is, why? Why did seemingly humans and some other species deliberately choose to create this being? We're going to get into that. This is the Michael Denny YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, comment, do all those things. I'm here to tell you that disclosure is coming. Open contact is already here. I am proof of that. I am not only an experiencer of extraterrestrials, I also am a Bigfoot experiencer. We'll talk about that. I have some personal insight, having interacted and communicated with Sasquatch. I can tell you that this is big. This is absolutely huge. So, I've got a bunch of stuff I'm going to go through. So make sure that you stay through the whole video, because I've got a list. I'm going to go through it. I won't babble for too long in the beginning, but I've got 3 different lists I'm going to get to, talking about the facts, talking about what we know to be true and what the implications of all this are. So I just recently bumped into this YouTube video. I've got links below. I've got numerous links below. You should watch them, because Sasquatch is not what they appear to be. They appear to be some ancient ape. They appear to be for some people, some offshoot of human beings. Now, I was firmly of the opinion that what had happened is 2 million years ago, when there was multiple hominid pre-human species running around. There were large, what they call, I forget what they call them. There were these big, large human type of things walking around that looked like gorillas, and there were more gracile or more thin human beings walking around, which one of those, the Australopithecines, supposedly turned into humans. And so we know that there were multiple pre-human species walking around. Some of them were just basically, gorillas on 2 legs. And so I was firmly of the opinion that what had happened is that 2.5 million years ago, human beings, or the beings that evolved into humans, started from a very intellectual standpoint, because we know that a long time ago, it was more like 100,000 years ago, that human beings almost went completely extinct, and what saved them was their intellect. They were able to figure out where to go and how to get food, and so they became even smarter. So they really went into the left brain. And so that is what saved human beings and actually helped create what we now know as the third dimension. But I was firmly of the belief that what had happened is that there were other species that they evolved a different path, which became more of a right-brained, spiritual, emotional, intuitive understanding, and I believed that those beings became Sasquatch. So I believed that human beings and Sasquatch were, offshoots of the same pre-human whatever. But I knew from personal experience, and as well as other, massive amounts of experiences from people who've experienced Sasquatch, as well as native lore, that Sasquatch was a spiritual being, was a shapeshifter, had very powerful spiritual abilities to connect to other dimensions, to shift between our third dimension and some other dimension. That is very clear if you look at people's experience of them, mine included. So I had concluded that what had happened is Sasquatch evolved down a more spiritual path, humans went down a more intellectual path, and that's where they came from. But this scientific information that I've just run into from, I believe it was 2013, which, by the way, was completely, totally shunned by the scientific community, even though, as it turns out, the science, from what I can tell, looks impeccable. And the conclusions are very clear. But, of course, this was, scientists, colleges and universities can't look at this, because if they do, they'll lose all their funding. So there's a lot of bias in that. So in any case, let's go ahead and get into it, because I want to get into eventually what happened 15,000 years ago. Why did some other unknown species, perhaps extraterrestrial, perhaps not even of this dimension, why was there a clear orchestrated event that resulted in a being that was half human, half something else, that has the ability to switch between the third dimension and other dimensions and has all kinds of other powers? That seems to have been an orchestrated event. Question is why and what was it? Stay tuned throughout this, because it's going to blow your mind. All right, so let's go ahead and just get into it. So let's start with Dr. Melba S. Ketchum. I hope I'm spelling that right. Found that, and again, the link for this is below. Go check it out. She found that Sasquatch mitochondrial DNA was 100% human. The nuclear DNA was from unknown species. So what does that mean? So mitochondrial DNA comes always from the mother. So, if you go and get yourself your DNA tested and they find out what's your mitochondrial DNA, they'll be able to tell you where your mother came from. And what was the other kind of DNA they call it? The nuclear DNA. That's contains stuff that comes from the father. So when you have something that's this black and white clear, the mitochondrial DNA was human, 100% human. That means, without even having to do any investigation, you already know from looking at that the maternal line was human, 100%. What was the other species? An ape? Do you know of any apes that are able to shapeshift, that are able to travel interdimensionally, that can communicate telepathically, that has healing powers? These are some of the things that people have experienced. I've experienced some of those things. I'll tell my story if you haven't already heard it, but I've experienced that, and I know for a fact these beings are absolutely not from the third dimension. But what has always stuck in my mind is that they seem like they're half and half part of our third dimensional reality? Why would they show up fully physically in their, supposed ape form, doing all kinds of ape things in the physical realm, and then switch into these light orbs that shift? How are they able to seem so animal-like in a lot of their behavior? They hunt. They hunt deer and elk and other things. And they know that. They like treats that they get from humans. They're afraid of humans. But at the same time, there's this weird curiosity they have towards us. Sometimes animosity. Sometimes they create deep relationships with us. They shift from this reality to another reality. What is that all about? They seem to be half and half. So this is what boggled my mind. Now again, I would have never, if you've been following my channel, I would never have put a thumbnail like this saying that Bigfoot or Nephilim. People have been saying that for years, and I have vociferously and aggressively denounced it. Again, this is something I said when I had my red pill moment, that a lot of people are right for the wrong reasons, and I was wrong for the right reasons, meaning that I have good critical thinking skills, and a lot of people project their fantasies, their fears, their religion. So it's just a lazy conclusion to look at the Bible and say, oh, well, that's what Bigfoot is. They're Nephilim. It's clear somebody's just wrapped up in their biblical, Abrahamic religion narrative, and they can't get out of it. But it turns out they're right, but not exactly right. I also didn't believe in Atlantis. I didn't believe in the Lemurians. I also didn't believe in extraterrestrials. I believe in all of those things now. And I've had some awakenings and some, again, I never believe anything because I read it somewhere. When it comes to spiritual beliefs, the only beliefs I hold on to are things that I have personally experienced and proven through personal experience. If it's just a belief because I believe it because it makes sense to me for whatever reason, I will tell you this is my belief and here's the reasons why. If I state something as fact, even though it may or may not be, it's coming from my direct personal experience. So my direct personal experience over the past 3 years, working directly with extraterrestrials, watch my video. I should probably put a link for that in it as well. How I became an extraterrestrial. You can find out how I started communicating with ETs and where that's brought me. But that has recently, over the past 6 months or so, has revealed to me the truth about the flood myth, the truth about Atlantis, the truth about the pyramids, that all of that actually happened. It existed. I have past life memories of this now that's been given to me, shown to me by my extraterrestrial friends. And I've recently started doing, now that I now have been given or have awakened an ability within me, I can communicate telepathically with beings in other dimensions. I went back and thought, I'm going to try and communicate with this Sasquatch that I experienced. That was back in 2001, sorry. 2001 was my Sasquatch experience, and I made contact. And I can feel now extraterrestrials are trying to tell me there's a connection. I can feel their energy showing me that. So we're going to take a look at all of that stuff. So anyway, hang on. Let's keep going. Just want to make sure that you understand, I'm not just simply, 99% of YouTubers are simply spouting what they read somewhere. Listen, conspiracy theories turn out to be conspiracy truths when they've been proven true. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people out there spouting a bunch of nonsense because they read it somewhere or saw it on Gaia TV or something. I'm not one of those people. Believe me or don't believe me, what I'm going to share with you comes from my experience. I've proven it to myself. It's not because I read it somewhere and I'm just parroting what somebody said. It's not even coming from some old text A lot of people think they've found some 1,000-year-old text and therefore it's true. Well, human beings knew how to write, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And they knew how to lie and make mistakes. So just because it was written by the Sumerians doesn't mean crap. Doesn't make it any more true than anything else written by anybody now. Personal experience. This is what I give on this channel. Follow my channel, do these meditations. You can have your own personal experiences. You don't ever have to read somebody's book ever again. Unless you're reading mine and you want to know what my experience was. michaeldenny.org. All right, let's get back into this. Sorry for spouting off here. So, Dr. Melba Ketchum found that Sasquatch mitochondrial DNA was 100% human. Nuclear DNA was from some unknown species. This means that unknown species mated with human females, solely with human females. This interbreeding was determined to happen 15,000 years ago. Now, I don't know how they figured that out. But I'm going to take it at face value, and I'm happy that if that turns out to be wrong. I'm not a DNA scientist anyway, so I wouldn't be able to know all the details. But she was very clear that this interbreeding event happened 15,000 years ago. That's relevant for reasons we're going to find out. It means, however, that it was an orchestrated event, happened 15,000 years ago. So biblical lore states that the sons of God mated with human women just before the flood event. So I'm sharing this not because I'm saying that the Abrahamic religion is an accurate historical book. It is absolutely not. It is horrifically horrible. People want to use that book to try and understand history. But many of the stories in it, most notably the flood story. The flood story came from a much earlier story from the Sumerians. So I want to be clear about something. Some people really believe, I believe this, they believe that the Bible is the oldest written historical. It's not. The Bible as you know it was written very recently. In fact, it was written during Roman times. It drew from other sources, obviously, but a lot of it was completely, totally fabricated. And I could get into the history of what really happened with, I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, it is absolutely fabricated. It is fabricated. It's a religious political book designed to use religion to create a theocracy. And so it's not about telling you the truth. It's about manipulating you into a mindset so you can be controlled. However, the biblical narrative, which comes from a much older understanding from Sumerian times, that's interesting. That doesn't mean anything in and of itself, except for the fact that the flood event is talked about universally all over the world. So, that, just because the Bible is wrong in all kinds of other ways, doesn't mean that there isn't some of the knowledge and lore that they borrowed and used that doesn't have some element of truth in it. So the biblical lore states that the sons of God mated with human women just before the flood event. The reason why I've got sons of God in quotes and why that's important is because they were talking about divine beings. What we would say, were angels. So angels are seen as beings that have divine powers. They're beyond human. And so according to this, just before the flood event, these divine, higher dimensional beings, whatever they were, according to this lore, they chose to have relations not with one, but with many females, human females. And the result of that was the Nephilim, the giants. we'll get into some how that starts to go into some crazy places. All right, so the Younger Dryas Cataclysm flood event happened 13,000 years ago. These beings are said to have been created through an interbreeding event that happened 15,000 years ago. Once again, we're in alignment with the biblical myth, which is that the sons of God mated with the daughters of men. They created the Nephilim. After that, sometime soon after that, the flood event happened. So far, it's all lining up. So the Younger Dryas Cataclysm flood event happened 13,000 years ago. That is a real thing. That is a scientifically, almost universally accepted understanding, that there was a massive flood event. Now, I lived in Idaho for 10 years, and I can tell you, you can see in the topography there, I've driven through many of these places. There are canyons that were literally carved, huge canyons that were carved from massive floods, massive, water miles high, just destroying the land and creating these huge canyons everywhere. We know this happened. It absolutely did happen. And so the Younger Dryas Cataclysm event is theorized to have been caused by comets that came crashing to Earth and struck the ice caps at the top of the Arctic. And they were 2 miles thick in some places. Instantly vaporized them. So notwithstanding all of the damage that would come as a result of being smashed into by flying debris coming from outer space, what that would have done to the Earth and what that would have done to the tectonic plates and who knows whatever else. But having that amount of water released onto the Earth, it's whatever civilization was there would have been completely demolished and destroyed. The Earth would have completely shifted. So this happened, according to this scientist, 15,000 years ago, just before the flood event. And this is a real thing. So the timing of the interbreeding matches exactly with the biblical lore. So the biblical flood myth is based on older stories found all over the globe. The DNA results prove that some unknown species bred solely with human females in order to produce viable breeding population. This was not an isolated event. So the point I'm trying to make with that is that it's not that there was, like when we look at Neanderthals, and every now and then we bump into, or not we, scientists will discover hybrids. They'll be, part Neanderthal, part human. All non-African humans all over the planet have, up to 2% Neanderthal DNA. I haven't had mine checked, but I'm proud of that fact. Neanderthals, we now know, Neanderthals had blonde hair, blue eyes, red hair. Where do you think Europeans get that? They didn't evolve that. They got it from interbreeding with Neanderthals, and it stuck because that's what allowed Ice Age humans to get the most sun, all that stuff. It just worked well. So, that's how natural selection works. So that's where white people got their weird look that looks so different from everybody else on the planet. So we run into that. Again, humans aren't half Neanderthal, half human. Humans are 98% human, 2% Neanderthal or Denisovan. We're basically almost completely human. So the interbreeding events between humans and Neanderthals were random, isolated events. This isn't. It's clear. It's clear as day. Bigfoot is 50% human from the mother's side. The other side is something else. It was an orchestrated event. And it had to have been done not once or twice, because then, you got interbreeding. And it's not like, two Sasquatch were created like Adam and Eve and they went at it and created a whole race. No, that wouldn't have been a viable breeding population. So in order to keep it a viable breeding population, there must have been a good number of these human females who, we don't know, maybe, I'm going to assume that this was something they chose to do. I'm not going to make the assumption that it was some kind of horrible forced, situation. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. But when we look into this and we see that this was an orchestrated event between human beings and some other non-3D race, I don't think it was forced. I think it was a cooperative event, and it was done on purpose. And I'm going to tell you why as we go further into this. So, in order to produce a viable breeding population, this was not an isolated event. Sasquatch experiencers often claim that Bigfoot is a being with magical powers. Why do I say that? Because it seems very clear to me, and I'll get into more detail later in the video explaining why this is so important, but it seems very clear to me that this other species was a very powerful spiritual race, and they weren't third dimensional. This is important because the biblical lore, again, which is repeating an older, they've distorted it to fit within their religious narrative, but it comes from an older understanding, older knowledge, older common knowledge. The sons of God, angels. I can tell you, having experienced extraterrestrials, if I didn't know anything about, if I didn't know that we live on a planet in a solar system, in a universe, if I had just had, an experience of somebody, from a few hundred years back, I would have absolutely thought they were angels. In fact, I still can't have any other kind of thought about them because they're higher dimensional. The word elf, in the Norse, translates into being of light. So this idea that there are angels, that there are beings of light that interact with human beings, this is something that is an actual thing. I've experienced it. It's not how the Bible interprets it. I wouldn't interpret them as messengers of God. They are people just like you and I are. They happen to be of a different species, and they happen to be in a different dimension, a higher dimension, but they're just beings like you and I. So this it's very clear. Bigfoot is clearly something that's not third dimensional. All right, so list of paranormal, let's see. Sasquatch experiencers often claim that Bigfoot is a being with magical powers. So here's a list. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is just a list of paranormal Sasquatch abilities. Telepathy, shape-shifting, healing, interdimensional travel, ability to transform into orbs of light, association with other paranormal beings, like extraterrestrials. So click in the links below. There's a video in there. Now these videos, there's a couple of them that I just came across, and I was very excited when I came across them. And the reason is because, I've been alive a while, and I had an extremely paranormal experience with a Sasquatch. And even though I had heard people hint about that or talk about, natives say that they're shamans or whatever, the vast majority of Bigfoot experiences, although some of them were hard to explain, a lot of them were just very third dimensional, just some big, human-like ape walking around. And so the fact that I started running into these, a lot of these experiencers with Sasquatch who were having the same kinds of experiences that I was having with extraterrestrials and the same kind of experience I had with Sasquatch, and even beyond that. There's one, click the link down here, there's one where a Sasquatch transforms into a red orb of light and then takes off, shooting through the sky. Try to explain that. And it's so stark, the difference. It's not like it was, some kind of extraterrestrial in glittery white robe standing there, and then turned into a beam of light and left. That makes sense. Higher dimensional being. But something that seems more third dimensional than humans, seems less evolved than humans, this is a big ape, turns himself into an orb and shoots off into the sky. That's just so, the contrast is just undeniable. But that kind of stuff, and there's more in there, where you start to wonder, what the heck are these beings? The reason why I find it interesting is that it seems to me that the experiences with Sasquatch, as well as with extraterrestrials, are becoming more and more paranormal. If you've followed my channel, you know how bizarre, absolutely mind-bending and bizarre my experiences with ETs have been. So if this is starting to happen more and more, it means, guess what? Our reality is shifting. That's why I think this is so important. Telepathy. Let's talk about that. List of paranormal Sasquatch abilities. Telepathy. So I didn't know it at the time, but when I had my Sasquatch experience, this was back in 2001, I had became interested, and I was like, gosh, I'd really like to see one of these beings. I'd like to meet one. I had no idea what the hell I was talking about. But that's what I was thinking. And I had read somewhere that if you meditate before you go up to wherever it is you're going to communicate with these beings, and if you meditate and send out a meditative telepathic invitation for any Sasquatch in the area to come and visit you, that you are more likely to have an experience. So I tried it. Now, it turns out that is exactly what you do when you want to have an experience with extraterrestrials. It's called CE5. Go look it up, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. I don't need to give you a link. You can use Google. Just type the letters C, the letter E, and the number 5, and then the word protocol. And you'll find out that that's basically the main thing of it, is that you are sending out a mental invitation to extraterrestrials to have an experience with them, to communicate with them, and they'll show up. So that is exactly what I did in 2001 and I didn't know anything about CE5. I don't even know if anybody knew about CE5 back then. But I did that, and I had a similar experience. A being showed up that was absolutely not part of this third dimension, and I'll tell you my story, towards the end, but the interaction was... But people are now having telepathic experiences. Now, I haven't heard of this. I had heard of all kinds of paranormal experiences with Sasquatch. But now people are having direct telepathic communications with them, in the same way that people have direct telepathic communications with extraterrestrials. this tells me that this is a being, might as well be an ET. And I know when somebody's telling the truth. I was studying this and I started looking into other experiencers, and I clicked on a video of some woman who claims to be a psychic and has these psychic experiences. And I could tell by listening to her that they weren't authentic. I can't tell you if she was lying or if she was just deluded or if she was just fantasizing. But I can tell you that it sounds good on paper. But when you've had actual telepathic experiences and communications with beings from higher dimensions, you can tell the difference when somebody's talking about it. You can't fake it. I can tell instantly when somebody is either faking it or deluded. And it's usually because they will say something that sounds good to a third dimensional brain. But the actual experience is something that goes beyond that. And I can tell by the way some of the things that people say, the way they describe it, I can tell if they're having the same kind of telepathic interdimensional communication as I've had. And I put a link in here of one guy who was given that experience, and he explains it perfectly. In fact, you could change out his communication, his telepathic experience from Bigfoot with ET, and it would be the same. Which means that these beings are not third dimensional. Which goes back again to the whole idea of the sons of God, married the daughters of men. Which the scientists said 15,000 years ago, there was an interbreeding between female humans and some other species. So shape-shifting, that is something that I know that ETs have the capability of doing. The Nagas, which are serpent beings. By the way, all the serpents here on this planet are a testament to them. They put those animals here for us. In fact, I now know, whenever I see a snake, in fact, I saw one just the other day outside my front door. Whenever a snake here, slithers out in front of me, I know that something powerful is going to happen. So this is true with the mantises, snakes. These are things that are not, they're special. They're special beings. And these were left here by extraterrestrials. Mantis beings left the mantis insects, and the Nagas left the snakes. So Nagas are known to shapeshift, and they can shapeshift into humans. So again, this just creates a lot of questions. These beings that are so physical and seemingly so primitive shapeshift. They can shapeshift into rocks, into trees, into all kinds of stuff. They have just amazing abilities. So that's another one that shows that they're some kind of higher dimensional being. Healing. This is interesting. There are people, I didn't put the links down in here, but if you look, the channel, if you look at one of the channels there, look for it, you'll find people being healed by Sasquatch. In the same kinds of ways that people are healed by extraterrestrials. I've had a couple of healing events with extraterrestrials as well, and the descriptions are the same, which doesn't mean that Sasquatch are extraterrestrials. It means that they are from a different dimension, because only that higher dimensional energy is able to do that kind of stuff. Interdimensional travel, that's obvious. The ability to transform into orbs of light. I think I mentioned that one guy's experience, there were two of them, which is why it's so much more believable. And again, I can tell when somebody's making it up. I can tell when somebody's lying or deluded. I can tell. I believe these guys. Now, I've never experienced that, what they described, but I believe it. It has that air of the same kind of, and the way that they both talked, I'm an actor. I can tell when somebody's acting. They weren't acting. By the way, that's one of the reasons I know, one of the ways that I know that when somebody's talking about something that it's not kosher, because, you can tell when somebody's doubting their acting. Actors, at some point, unless they're brilliant actors, which means they really believe themselves to be that character in that moment. Most actors, if you're an actor, you can tell when somebody's acting. Doesn't mean that the acting's bad, you can just see them acting. I see it all the time. These guys weren't acting. And they don't have the skills. And one of the guys talking that wouldn't, even if he wanted to, I can tell he wouldn't have had the skills to act. But to see a Sasquatch turn into an orb of light and then take off into the sky, we're dealing with something, and I'll talk about it, what I think may be going on. And they're also associated with other paranormal beings like extraterrestrials. So lots of times people will have sightings of ETs or ET craft and Bigfoot and wolfman things, all kinds of things. So this usually happens when there's an interdimensional portal where beings from both lower dimensions and higher dimensions can be seen and experienced. By the way, that's what the dogmen are. The dogmen are second dimensional beings. They're not fourth or fifth. Don't listen to anybody who says that beings from the fourth dimension are evil. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand dimensions and how dimensions work. I do. There's a lot I don't know, but there are some things I do know. And I've experienced demons. I used to be an exorcist. So they're from another dimension, but they're not from the fourth dimension, from the second dimension. All right. So native lore claims that Bigfoot is from a parallel Earth dimension, and they can travel between 3D Earth and their other home dimension. I find that very interesting, because they do seem to be half and half. They've always seemed to be half and half. People have asked me about what are Sasquatch or Sasquatch ETs, and I haven't had an answer, because they don't act like extraterrestrials. They're transdimensional beings. They can shift from our dimension to some other dimension. They can enter our dimension in a higher dimensional form. But they don't seem to indicate that they have ships and travel to other worlds. They're from Earth. They seem to be associated with Earth. I don't know, but it seems to me that they have the ability to switch frequencies. They can switch from what we would call 3D Earth to perhaps what we would call 5D Earth, which would be another frequency of Earth. Might not be the fifth dimension, but for the sake of understanding, we use the phrase 5D. Everybody knows what that means. I don't know that it is the fifth dimension, because that entails all kinds of other things. Most people don't understand what dimensions are, so they don't know the difference. By the way, there's a difference between a parallel universe and another dimension. A lot of people will talk about beings from other dimensions, and what they mean is a parallel third dimensional universe. There's also a difference between a higher frequency of the third dimension and a higher dimension. So I don't know. I don't know if these beings are from a higher frequency of Earth, because they seem to be very Earth-oriented, or if they are connected to a whole other dimension altogether, or an alternate universe. I'm not sure I believe in alternate universes, but I'm willing to look at that. But they're definitely half and half. They're half 3D Earth and half something else. And native lore is very clear about that these beings are, have a connection. That is, they have another home, and they go back and forth. They like it here. There are things about the third dimension that they like. They obviously like being in a third dimensional physical form. They're very physical beings, clearly. I mean, the way that they physically interact and communicate is extremely physical. Listen to the Sierra Sounds link put below. You can hear them communicating in their own language, it's almost like a more intense human language, which is what would happen if you were half 3D and half higher dimension. Things would get turned up and you would communicate in a way that would be really difficult for us to hear. It would be too intense. But from their perspective, they're just communicating like we are. But when you turn up the dimensional volume, as it were, our experience is it's very intense, it's very shocking. And when you listen to them communicate in their language, or at least one of their languages, it sounds really hostile and aggressive and intense. My experience with the Sasquatch was, I experienced it as very hostile and aggressive. In hindsight, I realized that's not what was going on. I was experiencing a higher dimensional energy, which my third dimensional body experienced as aggressive. But it's just higher dimensional. But that's what you're going to get with something that's half 3D and half 5D, if you will. It's going to come across intense and powerful, and perhaps even, give you the feeling of violence and danger. They might even be violent if they're half third dimension. That means when they're in the third dimension, they would be subject to all of the third dimensional issues, violence and everything else. They're predators. They hunt and kill animals. So they're not a higher dimensional being, and they're not human. So what the heck are they? All right, so native lore claims that Bigfoot is from a parallel Earth dimension and can travel between 3D Earth and their other home dimension. This indicates that unknown DNA is from a species from outside of 3D Earth. This would indicate that Bigfoot's nature is half 3D and half 5D. Okay, that's what I just said. So before the flood event, 3D humans worked with 5D ETs to create the pyramids. All right, so now I'm going to talk with you again. I state this as a fact, not because I read it somewhere. I can't prove it to you, but I'm convinced of it based on my experiences. I didn't come up with this. This is not something I ever would have believed. I never believed in Atlantis. I never believed in the flood. I never believed in ancient civilizations. I was my dad was a physicist. I spent 8 years in university back in the 80s. I was very much part of that scientific norm, even though I was a Taoist and I did spirit fighting and I meditated, out-of-body experiences, shaman, all that. I had that, and then I had my 3D science mind. So I wouldn't have believed any of this stuff. So I'm telling you this as a fact because I am convinced of it, because this is what has been shown to me by extraterrestrials. And I've made videos about it, which is that at the height of Satya Yuga, which is, we're already out of Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga ended in 1700 AD. Don't listen to other people that tell you we're still in Kali Yuga. They're wrong. Kali Yuga ended in 1700 AD. We're now in the beginnings of Dwapara Yuga, which means we're shifting up. We're moving towards Satya Yuga, which is the golden age where human beings are 100% connected to the spirit. This is when Atlantis was around. This is when the pyramids were created. And this is when, if it was 15,000 years ago, this would have been when Sasquatch was orchestrated. Would have happened at this time. And so I can tell you from personal experience, and it's not just mine, other people who have had similar experiences, whose experience I trust, they can remember. They can remember when they were extraterrestrial here on Earth helping humans to create the pyramids. As you've heard, I was according to ETs, not according to me, according to the extraterrestrials who I've been communicating with, they were very clear that I was somebody of some importance and some power in Atlantis, and that I was working directly with primarily the Pleiadians in order to create spiritual technology, which is what the pyramids are. I've talked about that at length. I won't get into that. So all of this is happening back then, and so that's why it's got my attention. When I saw that, at first when I saw that the scientist had determined that Bigfoot was 50% human from mitochondrial DNA, which meant an interbreeding event, I was like, eh. And then when I heard 15,000 years ago, I went, oh. And then I started putting the other things together. These are not 3D beings. They're very 3D sometimes, and they're very 5D. They're very magical beings. That would make sense. Because beings that are 100% 5D, they don't do that. They don't act like Sasquatch. They don't go back and forth like that. So if you had the instinct, sort of like a wolf dog, if you know anything about wolf dogs are more dangerous than wolves. Like if you have a full-blooded wolf as a pet, it's potentially dangerous. It's not a good pet. It's not domesticated, but they're predictable. Whereas wolf dogs, they're half wolf and half dog. They go back and forth. This is why idiots who get wolf dogs thinking they're getting a more pacified wolf are morons, because the wolf side of them is very unpredictable in a wolf way. And then the dog side of them wants to be a domesticated dog, but they're schizophrenic. They go back and forth. And so they will approach you and bite you, like cats will do. They will growl at you while you're petting them. You don't know when they're going to turn on you, because they're very uncomfortable. It makes them very uncomfortable. Anyway, I don't know. I forget why I got on that subject. Anyway, so before the flood event, 3D humans worked with 5D ETs to create the pyramids. That's my personal experience and past life remembrance. Believe me or don't, I'm okay with that. The flood event happened as a result of humans misusing spiritual technology. So, the biblical lore says that God punished evildoers. The Nephilim were on the earth. Whatever. I think they're conflating two different things. And of course, they're borrowing this information from previous civilizations. They don't even know what it means. They're using it, distorting it, and manipulating it for their own religious ends. So they want to focus on God being God and humans being evil. So this story works well in their narrative, so they fit it in there in the way that they wanted. But I did learn this. Again, something I would have never, ever believed. But I was led to believe that I was told and shown that I worked directly with extraterrestrials, that they were giving us their knowledge and working with our scientists and with our priests to create spiritual technologies. So it was a cooperative event. It was humans as well as extraterrestrials from all over the place bringing their knowledge together to create the pyramids. And a bunch of other things, by the way. A bunch of other megalithic sites had tremendous power, and temples and things like that used all kinds of spiritual technology to do all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to get into that now. How did I get on that? So the flood event happened as a result of humans misusing spiritual technology. So the biblical event, God punished the earth. But I would reject it simply because of that. If that were the only one, I would reject it, because I reject the biblical narrative for all kinds of reasons. But that's in line with every other teaching around the world, that human beings, even Plato, the Greek philosopher, says that the gods, specifically Zeus, or he hints that Zeus had decided to destroy human civilization because humans had become corrupted. They had become evil. I know, based on what I saw, I don't know if I know exactly, but I have a pretty good idea what happened. We were using spiritual technology for spiritual purposes, but it was very, very powerful technology that could be misused. And when we started approaching the height of Satya Yuga, which meant we were going to start shifting down again, the Pleiadians came to me and said, you have to stop using the technology. The time for that is over. And because I had had a dream, according to other historical sources, I had had this dream as, this ruler of Atlantis. I had had this dream that something horrible was going to happen to the earth, which was going to blind humans to their spirituality. And this was unacceptable to me, so I refused. I said, no, I'm going to keep using it. And the result of that was that as we started shifting down, the other elites, the Lemurians, some of the Lemurians and some of the Atlanteans, and I don't know who else, their spirituality started shifting down, and they started wanting to use the technology to control and enslave the human population. That resulted in a war between Atlantis and some of the other elites rebelling against them. At that same time, the Lemurians shifted to 5D. They allowed the technology that had been used, they knew how to use it, and they were smart about it, and they decided to take advantage of that higher frequency, and they shifted up. And they are, and again, I wouldn't have believed this because it's just hokey and new agey and ridiculous. I only know because I've reached out and interacted with them and communicated with the Lemurians. They are, in fact, in a higher dimensional state under Mount Shasta, which again, a lot of Bigfoot are there. So that there's some connection. We'll look at that a little bit later. So now I'm telling you this because now we're going to start looking at, well, what the heck are these beings? What is their purpose? We're going to start taking a look at that. I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler. I believe these beings, these Sasquatch, were bred into existence knowingly so that they could help planet Earth make it through these different yugas. And then now they're upgrading as well, and they're helping the Earth shift up. This is my belief. That was the purpose. That's why humans and whoever else, whatever other beings, decided to come together and create these Nephilim. All right. Sasquatch are known to inhabit areas. Let's see. Flood event happened as a result of humans misusing spiritual technology. Sasquatch behavior indicates strong connection as Earth protectors. So we've heard this, we've experienced it. The times when a Sasquatch have been known to be violent is when you have a lot of humans coming in and constructing in really remote natural areas. Then there's been, some violence that occurs. And I don't know if these stories of violence are true, but I'm willing to accept it because if they're half 3D and half something else, then that would mean in their third dimensional state they might be potentially violent. And so it doesn't mean that they're not good beings. It's just, if humans come in and start destroying sacred power sites and their 3D homes, they're going to get protective of it. In one recent experience which I saw, it made perfect sense to me. Some idiot went to some place he knew Sasquatch was going to be, and there happened to be some vents, some earth, vents, like in some of the national parks there. And so there was all these vents coming out, steam and spray and water and all that. And so this moron shows up and he picks up a boulder and he's going to throw the boulder into the vent and block it with the experiment to see if there's enough power for it to, explode the rock out. It's like a complete idiot moron. And so as soon as he does that and he picks it up, out of nowhere, this enormous Bigfoot jumps in and, scares literally the crap out of him and stops it. And so it was obvious to anybody listening to the story that this being was protecting that earth spot, those vents. He was protecting the earth, that this guy was trying to block it with a boulder. This being was not seen. He didn't see or sense this being, but that being obviously knew what his intention was, and then manifested out of nowhere and stopped him. Obvious. He didn't attack the guy. Once it became clear that he wasn't gonna throw the rock, the Sasquatch didn't attack him, didn't hurt him. It was clear he was protecting the earth. So Sasquatch are known to inhabit areas associated with dimensional portals. I know this personally from experience, because when I went and had my Sasquatch experience, I went to a place that I knew from experience was an energy portal. So, I've spent a lot of time, the first half of my life, I spent a lot of my spare time up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The Sierra Nevada mountains are very powerful spiritual portals. Also, you wouldn't believe it, but the mountains around Los Angeles, there are lots of mountains. Big Bear, there's areas around Big Bear. People don't know it because there's so many. I mean, they walk right by it. I did. There was a trail that I had walked many times, and I didn't realize, but there was an energy portal there. And I had a huge experience one time. I won't get into that, but so I know that those exist in all of those mountains. Now, all of those mountains are granite. And if you know anything about granite, like the pyramids, granites are basically giant crystals. So these are very energetically powerful. I was very surprised because I had spent all of my time in the mountains in the Sierras, the high Sierras, which are all granite, and I could feel the energy. My body was very sensitive to the power of that place, and I would always go into these higher dimensional astral trips and dreams and things like that. And so I thought it was because of the elevation. So I had assumed that any place at that elevation, 10,000 feet or above, or 8,000 feet or above, was going to be spiritually powerful. And then I went to some mountains that weren't made of granite. They were just, big giant folds in the earth. And the energy wasn't there. I didn't feel it. And so I could tell, and it was just the energy just wasn't there. So these beings are often associated with very powerful places that have tremendous energy, which means portals, energy portals. So these are places that help them shift between the 3D and their world. And, I get it. There the times that I would go up into the Sierras, into these by myself. I'd spend 2 weeks by myself, up at 20 miles in and, going over sometimes 14,000 foot passes into, these wilderness areas that have never been touched by anything other than horses or humans on their feet. There's something you're in a whole different reality there. And so I get it. If I was, bi-dimensional, I was going from one dimension to another. I would want to show up there and live there. So that's why those beings are there. I get it. So Sasquatch behavior indicates strong connection as Earth protectors. Sasquatches are known to inhabit areas associated with dimensional portals. If the DNA tests are accurate, this indicates that Sasquatch was a new species. So I've already kind of hinted at that, which was totally not at all what I expected. I would have expected it to be like I said. This was something that evolved millions of years ago, that was an offshoot of something that went in two directions. One went human, one went Sasquatch. And that makes a lot of sense. But I know something about what happened 13,000 years ago. And so the idea that two species came together cooperatively to create a new species for spiritual reasons makes a lot of sense. That I've come to find out that things are far more orchestrated than we've been led to believe. It's not that I don't believe in evolution. I do. I just think that evolution was a coordinated experiment. I think all the different types of hominid beings that came up and went out of existence we as souls, as light beings, were testing different avatar bodies. And the ones that worked best are the ones we chose. The ones that didn't work so good, we didn't use them. All right, so if DNA tests are accurate, this indicates Sasquatch was a new species, created both by humans and higher dimensional beings to protect Earth. So I'm coming to that conclusion that Sasquatch are here to protect Earth because of now what I know what happened. That 13,000 years ago, after we started shifting back down again, the Earth was, humans were going to destroy the Earth. This is why higher dimensional beings, or as the Bible says, God, or as other religions, as the Greeks were, hinting that it was Zeus, that other societies say the gods came together and decided they were going to wipe out human civilization because they were dangerous, they were corrupt, they were evil. And so that I don't think that was really what beings were planning on happening, and so they had to get creative. So I think that Sasquatch is the result of them getting creative and orchestrating a situation where they could have actual 3D beings, or beings that were part 3D, to actually be here and protect the energy portals for the Earth, protecting the Earth. You don't see Sasquatch running around in downtown Manhattan. They're not interested in that. They're interested in protecting powerful energy places, powerful spiritual or natural places, untouched natural places, and places that are sensitive to Mother Earth herself. So they're there to protect her. And I think that was a conscious decision. I believe that that conscious humans who saw what was coming, and higher dimensional beings, extraterrestrials, who knows what these other beings were, decided that they were going to come together to create a spiritual, powerful being that was half third dimensional, half something else, because you have to be third dimensional in order to protect the third dimension. This is why these meditations are so powerful. I was shown this when I was given this responsibility and shown that it was my job to lead these meditations, to shift the Earth. I was shown that extraterrestrials don't have the ability. They have all kinds of abilities, but they don't have the ability to shift the third dimension because they're not from this dimension. and they're not from this planet. So the only beings who have the ability to channel and direct this energy to shift the planet are beings from the third dimensional Earth. That's why we have to do this. If we don't do it, nobody will do it. So the Sasquatch have to be at least half third dimensional in order to shift. And it's interesting, they chose women because women are nurturers, they're mothers, and the Earth is feminine. And so, it all makes sense, but it's very orchestrated. It's very planned out and very orchestrated. And beautiful and amazing and, hard for my 3D brain to believe. Anyway. All right, so this indicates that Sasquatch was a new species created by both humans and higher dimensional beings to protect Earth. Recent Bigfoot encounters are becoming increasingly paranormal. This may indicate that the 3D veil is thinning as 3D Earth approaches 5D shift. So more and more people are having, myself included, are having extraterrestrial experiences like nothing that we've ever seen before. The previous experiences with ETs, were non-existent. And I'm not talking about the fake alien abductions. Those are done by humans, pretending to be ETs, to keep you frightened and create the blue beam event. No, actual ET experiences it hasn't been up until recently, and then there's been this explosion, which is continuing to explode. And the CE5 protocols that Dr. Stephen Greer, go check out his website, and was created with ETs. They got together and created a protocol that, I'm not going to get into the details, but is specifically designed to help human beings create a portal so that they can communicate and interact with higher dimensional beings so that human beings can shift up. This is all about shifting up. So as ETs we're having more powerful experiences, we're also having more powerful, more spiritual experiences with the spiritual protectors of this earth, the Sasquatch. And the interactions that people are having are more conscious and more loving. Unfortunately, one of the people who gave the samples to the scientist who came up with this, unfortunately, he got it by shooting 2 Sasquatches and then taking material. That's very sad. That's very sad. But it's the same kind of thing that happens with ETs. ETs are able to be shot down and killed when they come close to or manifest in the third dimension, which is why right now there isn't what people call open contact, what human beings, most 3D human beings, want to experience with open contact. I'm communicating with ETs all the time, so we have open contact, but it's going to be higher dimensional. It's going to be a trans-dimensional experience. But to have open contact where ETs are coming into the third dimension and landing in front of you and shaking your hand, they can't do that because in their third dimensional expression, they are vulnerable. They can be shot, they can be killed, they can be taken captive. So the same is true with Sasquatch. And in one of the links below, you'll see that they won't, if they know you have a weapon, they will not manifest in the third dimension for you. So if somebody, if a Sasquatch isn't paying attention and he manifests in the third dimension and somebody's got a gun, they can shoot him and kill him. It's very sad. And then you can understand why some Sasquatch are going to be violent and angry and have a grudge against humans. All right, so this may indicate that the 3D veil is thinning as 3D Earth approaches the 5D shift. Bigfoot may be shifting from protector to spiritual initiator. Can humans learn to dimension shift from Bigfoot? This is a question I have. And this is a question I asked because I hadn't gotten this information. Now that I have this information, it's their nature to shift. So it wasn't so much that they evolved and taught themselves how to shift like the Lemurians did. They were just born this way. They were created this way. They have this ability from birth. And that was when I most recently communicated with the Sasquatch that I talked to. I scoped him out astrally, and I believe that I found him, and I asked him, and I said, can you teach me how to shift dimensions? And his response is, we don't teach humans that. And I said, why? And he said, because we wouldn't know how to teach you how to do it. It's just something we do. Now I get it. Now that I have this new information. But can humans learn to dimension shift from Bigfoot? So I'm going to share my personal Bigfoot encounter and its connection to my current ET relationship. So this was 2001. I've been wondering since 2001. Over 20 years, I was wondering what the hell that was all about. Now I know. So I've made a video about it. You can look for it, search for it on my channel if you want. Just search for Bigfoot. I think I might even have. Anyway, you can find it if you look for it. But I'll try to be as brief as possible. So I told you that I basically did Sasquatch CE5, and I meditated and said, hey, if any of you guys are out there, I'd love to meet you. I'd love to talk to you. Now, like extraterrestrials, Sasquatch will never consciously interact with you unless there's a spiritual purpose. They just won't. Same with ETs. And if you do have an interaction with an ET, it's going to be transformational. It's going to bust you out of your comfort zone big time. And it's going to be about you shifting. And it's, these aren't pleasant shifts. Again, this is how I know somebody is full of crap when they talk about, if they've had a spiritual experience and everything was wonderful and blissful and that's all that happened. That's the only thing they can talk about. I know they're full of crap. Because you don't experience these beings. When you do communicate with them, there's a part of your third dimensional person that dies. So there's an ego death. There's a death and an expansion. Even if you're being told something wonderful, like you're the god of whatever, they'll tell you things like that. And you think, oh, that's just big for my ego. A lot of people try to criticize me and they say, you don't understand these evil spirits, these demons, they're going to come at you at your ego and they're going to stroke your ego. And I can tell these are people that have never had this experience because it is not an ego stroking event at all. And if you've had experience, you know what I'm talking about. In fact, it destroys your ego. It's a very traumatic experience for your ego. So there's no way that you have that experience, even though it's blissful and amazing and wonderful. There's also this Odin-like ego death that happens. So anybody who says otherwise, they don't know what they're talking about. What was I talking about? So my personal Bigfoot encounter. Anyway, so I did the thing. Hey guys, I'm coming. I want to talk to you. I'd love to meet you. Not having any idea what the hell I was getting myself into. And sure enough, it happened to be the night before 9/11. Very interesting. I was up in the mountains September 10th, 2001, and this was the night that it happened. So right at sunset, and it was, sunset in the mountains, for some reason, everything echoes more. Like during the day, for some reason, sound doesn't echo. But when it gets like right at dusk, the sounds increase. Like, you can hear literally, and I'm not, you can actually hear this during the day as well, but especially at sunset. You can hear a fly buzzing from 100 yards away. You'll hear this bzzz, and it'll sound like it's right around you, and then it'll be far away from you. So everything just gets magnified. It's just it's a really shifting between dimensions. It's a weird, it's a portal time. It's a time of interdimensional portal. And I'm just realizing that's why he showed up then. So right at dusk, where, I really can't see far around the forest around my camp. I really can't see deep into the forest. I can't remember if I had eaten. I think I had just finished eating, with my little cook stove and all that. And I think I was getting ready to, for the evening. And just outside of my visual range in the woods, there was a presence. And I heard a scream that was, up until that point, the single most frightening event of my life. Now, you would think, well, hearing a wild animal is frightening. I've heard wild animals before, all kinds. That's a different kind of fright. It's not the same at all. The sound that came out of whatever that being was physically very loud, but on top of that, there was a frequency to it that went through me. I felt it go through my whole body. And it wasn't just the sound, it was a frequency that came from another dimension. And the range of sound, if I had recorded it, I've listened to recordings of supposed Sasquatch, and the frequencies that they're able to record, I've heard, but I can tell you that, you hear people listening to some strange thing, howling or screaming in the woods, and you hear them going, oh my God, what the hell is that? When you listen to it, it's like, well, it could be all kinds of things. But when you're actually hearing it, and you're hearing the frequencies that can't get recorded onto normal recording devices, what you're dealing with is not part of this reality. And the way that I described it when it was done, after it happened, was that it sounded like a combination of 3 different things, actually 4. But the sounds that I heard were, on the high end, it sounded like a woman screaming in terror. On the low end, or the middle end, it sounded like a man screaming in anger. And then beneath that, it sounded like a dinosaur. You take all of those, put it into one sound and one scream. That's what I heard. And then there was the frequency that was not part of our reality. You put that all together, and it was just an absolutely, it was the most frightening experience I'd ever had. Now, my brain did the weirdest thing. My brain, the scream lasted, I'm estimating, about 3 seconds. That doesn't sound like a long time. But when you're in a state of trauma, 3 seconds lasts forever. 1001, 1002, 1003. Everything slows down. My brain went through a list of all of the possible things it could be, because my brain wanted to make sense of it. So I started going through all of the animals that it could be, and it wasn't any of them. I got through the list of all of the possible sounds it could be, and my brain said, I don't know what this is. And then the sound stopped. The scream stopped. Immediately, as soon as the scream stopped, immediately my brain kicked in and started to erase it. Like if it had gone on for another 3 to 5 seconds, I literally would have erased it from my memory. But before my brain could do that, the second scream kicked in. It was an identical scream. Everything else I just described, my brain did the same thing. It went through all the list of all the animals it could be, all of the possible sounds, plane, animal, whatever, and it got to, I have no idea what this is. This is not part of our reality. The scream stopped. My brain then kicked in, and it started to delete But before my brain could delete it, the third scream kicked in. My brain did the same thing, and then it just broke. My brain broke. And I was there was another reality that was surrounding me. And I knew that being was waiting to come into my camp. That being was going to walk into my camp. And the only thing that it was waiting for was for me to invite it in. And I was so frightened, and I thought about it, and realizing that I was communicating with a being that was not part of this reality. And I'd never, even though I'd been doing all kinds of spiritual things, even bending the laws of reality and energy work and being able to move things energetically, without touching, all that stuff. Even though I'd had out-of-body experiences and communications with all that stuff, even though I had all that stuff, what was on the other side of those trees was something that was going to break my reality. And that was the purpose. That's why he was there. He was there to come in and destroy my reality. What he was going to give me, I didn't know. In hindsight, I wish I'd done something different. But I did the best I could. And I definitely knew that if that being came in, my reality would end. I didn't know if I would leave this reality. I didn't know if it would kill me. I knew that something fundamentally would change on a dimensional level. And I was just too frightened. And so as that being was waiting for me, I sent out the mental invitation and I said, thank you for showing up. I know that I called you here and I appreciate that you showed up and you responded to my invitation. But if you come into my camp, it will kill me. And so please, thank you. I'm not ready for this. Please leave. And energy calmed down. Things got back to normal. It was night. By this time, it was dark. So I'm like, okay, I got to get through the night with this knowledge. And my brain luckily jumped in there and said, that didn't happen. And I blissfully went around and I finished cooking my food and eating and going to bed and good night's sleep. And then I woke up the next day, and the sun was shining and the birds were chirping and I'm stretching in the sun, and then it all came back. Oh my God, what the hell was that? And that was 9/11. The day that happened was 9/11. I had other dreams and experiences, but that's another issue. So that's my experience with Bigfoot. So I am now I feel vindicated that now more and more people, when you watch those experiences, more and more people are having the same kinds of experiences I have. And their experiences are almost identical to extraterrestrial experiences as well. So that's my personal Bigfoot encounter in connection to my current ET relationship. So I've been wondering for years what the heck that was about, other than I asked for it and some strange thing happened. And as I'm sitting here, I'm wondering how different my life would have been if I had invited that being into my camp. Holy crap. Holy crap. Maybe it was never meant to be. Maybe what happened was what was supposed to happen. See, he didn't have to do that. There are people that have experiences that are very different. What he did with me was very specific and very orchestrated. And I believe it gave me the ability to survive my first encounter with the mantis being. Again, watch the video. You can hear me on tape almost in tears talking about how frightened I was. And it was the same level of fear that I had with the Sasquatch. Same level of fear. And the same level of strangeness. And I could feel the energy was the same kind of energy. So he might have been giving me the ability, because I survived that experience, I was able this time to actually go forward and go, because I was, when I was saying I was frightened, I was consciously doing that because I was acknowledging the feeling and I wasn't acting on it. And it was my way of telling myself and telling this mantis being, I'm afraid, but I want you to still talk with me. I want to do this. I'm just acknowledging my fear, but I want to work through it. And what happened, in 9/11, I didn't want to work through it. I said, nope, I'm not doing this. We're not going there. And so I believe what he did is he cracked me open so that I would be able to survive the experience. Because my first two encounters with ETs, as a result of doing CE5, I talked myself out of it. So I needed to have a powerful experience I couldn't talk myself out of, which was what my brain tried to do when the Sasquatch showed up. My brain tried to talk me out of it. And I'm grateful to him, he pushed me past that. He broke my brain so that I couldn't deny it. And I remembered it. And I knew what it was. So it gave me the ability to survive that first experience. Not that there was anything ever dangerous that was going to happen to me with the Sasquatch or with the mantis being. It's just I was so afraid in my third dimensional mind. Again, I'm very third dimensional brain. I was part of the narrative up until 2021. And then I had my red pill experience. All right. So, possible connection between Lemurians and Bigfoot. I don't know enough about this yet. Maybe I'll find out. I'll do some interdimensional meditation. I'll ask the Lemurians to tell me. But I'm wondering if that was a Lemurian human, I don't know, maybe Lemurians, maybe Lemurian women. By Lemurians, I mean the 5D version. Maybe before that, maybe they got together and knew what was coming and they said, listen, before we shift, let us create a protector race that's half human 3D and half who knows what. By the way, I didn't know this until recently, but we know that there are, I believe that the mantis beings are about 7 feet tall, pretty big. I don't know that for a fact. That's just my thoughts and my belief based on my experience. Other people have said similar things. But we know that some, the Pleiadians, are tall, 6-7 feet tall. But I've heard from Dr. Greer that there are extraterrestrials that are 40 feet, 40. So that means, from 1 foot to 40 foot, that's how big you can get. So I can only imagine, based on how enormous Sasquatches are, alpha male Sasquatches can be something like 12 feet tall and 500, 600, 1,000 pounds. They're just absolutely enormous. They are giants. That would mean that the other species was even bigger than that. That would mean that I'm not going to. Anyway, that would mean that human females, human beings. I'm a little shorter than average, almost 5'9". 5'9" is about the average human around the earth. So if you've got a being that, the alphas are 12 feet, you've got humans that are 5'9", 6 feet. That's an extra 6 feet. And that would mean that Sasquatch is shorter than whatever the being was that human women mated with. So we're talking 25 feet tall. So there's some hugely powerful, higher dimensional extraterrestrial beings that mated with humans and created these enormous 12-foot tall, huge beings. These beings are so powerful that, when they hunt deer and elk, for instance, what they do is they're very fast and very powerful, and they will jump out from behind a boulder or something, and they will grab in one movement. People have seen them do this. They will grab the elk back leg and then just kill it instantly, break its neck. It's very, it's very benevolent. They kill them instantly, but they're that powerful. They can just grab trees and just snap them in half. They're so powerful. So imagine the beings that created them. I don't know. That might have been an intentional thing, but we have to at least, entertain the possibility that the actual other beings are at least twice as big as the Sasquatch. That's pretty amazing to me. All right, so the possible connection between Lemurians and Bigfoot. Lemurians are human beings that are now in 5D, actual fifth dimension, I believe. And Sasquatch seems to be a combination of the two. So it makes me wonder if they have a connection. It makes me wonder if that was something that the Lemurians worked on with whatever other extraterrestrial species. Anyway, who knows? I'm just thinking out loud here. All right, so that's it. We're all done. So I'm going to start focusing more and more on my ET channeling, which is I give directed communication from light beings, ETs, to individuals, and specifically to help you awaken to your 5D essence, because they will tell you. And so I will be able to verbalize what they say, and it works. They asked me to do it. It's not something I came up with. It wasn't my idea. They came to me and said, why don't you try this? And so I'm doing it now. And here's one testimony. Somebody, his name was Timothy, said, "You've provided a great clarity for me that I needed, and I'm eternally grateful for this. I cannot truly put into words the joy I feel. This joy feels beyond my physical avatar, and it feels like it predates my physical avatar. I've felt nothing like it." And everybody that I've had a reading with so far has had a similar experience. And it's a very beautiful experience for me. And I'm here to tell you it's not just me. I'm not just reaching back into my intuition. It's not any of that. I mean, I'm telling you, beings show up. I can feel them, and I can tell you exactly what they're thinking and what they're saying. And it's not coming from me. So go to channel.thunderwizard.com if you're interested in that. That's it for me in this very interesting scenario here. I'm very interested to find out more about what these guys really are. That guy looks a little too much like a gorilla. Anyway, that's it for me, my friends. I love you all. Please be very good to yourselves, and I will see you all very soon.